Hello, I'm Richard Vobes, the Bald Explorer. Today we're starting an interesting project which we will be revisiting from time to time. I'm out in the countryside, just north of Storrington, at an old historic mill. And I'm here to see a couple, Tony and Vivian, who have decided to, well, have a green roof. Now, a green roof is something that you perhaps wouldn't ordinarily see in the countryside, but are appearing in towns and cities all over the place and are very good for the environment. So I wanted to ask Tony, why a green roof?
Why am I greening up my roof at home? Well, the starting point was the old roof leaked. We had holes in the roof, it had served its purpose, we had to do something, so we're going to replace the roof. So replacing the roof was where we started. But well, at the same time we were thinking, well, it would be quite good for the roof to be an asset rather than just something that keeps the water out. And I happen to know somebody called Lee Evans, who's a bit of an expert in green roofs. So I started to think about the idea, well, why don't we have a green roof? Why don't we have something that actually looks like the rest of the property, something that contributes to the greening of the whole area? So green roof came as the idea. By a green roof, I mean a roof that's essentially alive. It's actually got plants living and growing on the roof itself. So it has to have obviously a substrate, some soil for it actually to be able to root into, and it's just a roof covered in plants, which is great. You can see these things in various different places and they've been tried in different areas, but the idea of a green roof, a roof covered in plants, was something which really excited me. Converting a normal roof into a green roof does take a bit of thought, obviously, because to do it well, it should be heavy. This is going to be quite a substantial construction. So the roof had to be replaced anyway, so we replaced it with something that was actually much stronger. We had to get a structural survey done to make sure the walls were strong enough. They were, great. And so then we built this much stronger roof to be able to take the weight of the soil that the plants had to grow into. The green roof obviously has to be looked after, it has to be in the right state so it can survive long term. Yeah. Now a large chunk of that is actually making sure that the substrate is deep enough. Make sure the soil's deep enough to support the plants. So that's important. If you get that right, then it'll be resilient to different sorts of weather conditions. I understand once we establish it, in the establishment phase, we probably will have to water it. I'm hoping after that we won't have to water it too much. I think some of this might be expectation as well. Grasslands dry out in summer. That's what happens. They get dry and they look brown. So I shouldn't expect to see flowers all through the year. If you imagine a green roof all flowering away, there should be lots of flowers, things people are familiar with like oxeye daisy, maybe some things that are a bit more unusual like Viper's bugloss. To start with, that's going to attract insects. So I think of these we're lucky we're in the countryside, but to think about a green roof in the middle of a town, with all these flowering plants on it, that's going to attract the pollinating insects. Things like birds, but also butterflies and all sorts of other species will be drawn in. So straight away, you think about the pollinators. But all sorts of other things as well. You start to make a food chain. If you make a food chain, then something will come and feed on what you've actually created. So you've got the plants, you get the insects, you get the things that come and eat the insects, and it starts to build up.
We're aiming to make it a deep roof that includes a load of waste materials, a load of building surplus, very accessible, very kind of democratic. It's not specialist materials in any way. There are evidence of green roofs dating back hundreds, thousands of years perhaps. There are some great pictures that you can find online of green roofs that were originally found in the Faroe Islands, in Greenland, in the Scandinavian countries, north of Scotland. There you would find that when relatively rudimentary dwellings were built, sods of earth would be dug from the ground and put onto the top of the structure where bark from trees, for example, or natural waterproofing methods had been found, and it's really there just to add a bit of thermal mass and also to keep in place the material. Obviously, we've put a bit more thought into how we do it now, but the principle is, yeah, it's a very old one, and certainly not one to be thought of as faddish or new.
Yeah, what we're doing on our roof, just as a bit of a experiment really, is trying different sorts of substrate, different sorts of soils, to see what sort of habitat they create. So some soils are quite sandy, which means they're fairly acidic in terms of their chemistry is fairly acidic. They support heathland type plants. Other substrates we're going to be using are more chalky. and so that it's more of an alkaline substrate, and you'll get the sorts of plants that you might see on the South Downs. And some of the soils are going to be in between. So we're experimenting with that so we can see what sort of matrix we can actually make on the roof, what sort of diversity of different plants follow the diversity of different soils that we put on there.
So some of these which have come from the land around here, we expect to have a seed bank already in them, so they'll start to spontaneously germinate. Others will overseed with some seeds which have been collected in the proper manner. So native UK wildflowers, annuals, perennials. We're also hoping, obviously, that there'll be windblown plants that will find their way in. If it was let's say a normal roof, a roof for not one of the country's leading ecologists, then I would then I would say that we would be on hand either to give some advice on how to care for the roof, or indeed to come back and tend to the space that we've created. So a meadow takes a couple of years like this. Will take a couple of years to kind of get going.
I'm guessing it's going to start slow. Because these soils, they're nutrient poor. You need nutrient poor soils because that supports more different species of plants. Yes. If you have very nutrient rich soil, one species dominates. So these are nutrient poor soils. So things are going to grow slowly. They may establish fairly soon, but I wouldn't be surprised if it takes several years before we start to see a really kind of complete swathe of plants. So again, it's about expectations. And I think that progress, that change with time is going to be really fascinating to watch. You know, what comes in, what grows first, what then takes over, how quickly do they grow, what do I need to do, all that stuff. One thing that really interests me about the concept of green roofs is how a green roof is just one point or one stepping stone throughout a whole city or a whole town. So if several people are doing this and all sorts of other green spaces, then you're creating a landscape that's permeable to wildlife. Wildlife can move through it rather than just kind of disappear into a great urban metropolis. They can find stepping stones, they can move from one place to another. And we know wildlife does this. We've seen this in Brighton, where individual butterfly banks have attracted butterflies that we didn't think would move that far. So we know it happens. We expect to see some of these insects that may be a bit of a surprise. Now we're lucky here because we do live in a really quite, wild part of the countryside. But it's a bit of an experiment here. What I'm fascinated by is, can this be, well, I'm sure this can be repeated in towns and suburbs and even countryside that's less rich. So it's how we can use these things as a stepping stone for wildlife throughout a city. Well, I'm hoping the next stage will be, we're putting the substrate on now. I think the next stage will be introducing the plants, which I think will be introducing a seed. You can use plugs or potted plants, but I think we're going to be using seed. And then they're going to start to grow. They need to go in now, so they go through winter. But I think it'll be spring before things start to germinate, probably, fingers crossed. So hopefully we'll start to see the little kind of spring of growth in spring itself.
Well, it looks to be a fascinating project, and I'm very keen to come back and see how it goes. This is obviously right at the beginning, at the early stage. So what I think we'll do is we'll come back in the autumn and see the finished product and see what there is to see, perhaps how the irrigation system works, and then revisit again when there's some growth coming through all that interesting soil. So don't forget to follow, like and subscribe, become a patron, support what I do, give me a thumbs up and all of that, and we will follow this story and see the benefits of having a green roof. Till next time, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.